Hello, CHID students. This session is devoted to acquainting you with the process of archiving your senior project through ResearchWorks and some of the considerations that you might want to think through as you do so. So we'll just get started. I'm just going to introduce myself and then allow the colleagues that I have here to introduce themselves. My name is Annie Dwyer. I'm use she/her pronouns, and I'm a lecturer in the CHID department. And oh yeah, I should probably say I also frequently teach the 491 class.
Maybe I'll go next. I'm Nick Barr, he, him pronouns. I'm also a lecturer in CHID and one of the other instructors for CHID 491 senior project class.
And I'm Elliot Stevens, he, him pronouns. I'm an English Studies and Research Commons librarian here at University of Washington, Seattle. And over the years, I've worked a whole bunch with CHID students on research for their projects, but also more recently, things to think about when it comes to digital accessibility and projects.
And we're really, really happy to have Elliot here today to talk a little bit more about accessibility when it comes to thinking about the format and and the choices that you're making as you're developing your senior project. So the first thing that we'd like to start with is just to sort of really just to kind of get you excited, some of the reasons why it is a great thing to publish your work through ResearchWorks. One of the things that doing this will allow is to give you a permanent URL handle, which you can just easily plop into a resume or a CV, and or just, it's a way to kind of easily share your work in a format that looks super professional, however you want to do that, whether that's while applying for a job or just sharing it with family and friends. So that's one of the strong arguments for archiving your senior project through ResearchWorks. Another reason I think that we're excited about a lot of CHID students archiving their projects through ResearchWorks is that it will allow future generations of CHID students to easily peruse and view projects that can give them inspiration for their own work. So I think if you are well into your senior project, you probably remember that moment when you asked, as Nick and I are asked almost every quarter we teach 481, are there examples of projects, or what are the examples of projects that students have pursued in the past? And so we're really excited about the possibility of just having an easily accessible archive of projects that can serve as inspiration for future chitties, and also, can be a way to sort of bring students into the department, bring resources into the department from donors and such. The final thing to kind of think about, the great thing about archiving your project through ResearchWorks is that you retain copyright of your project. You can set it to a Creative Commons license, and maybe I'll let Elliot say a little bit more about that. But it's just a way to to lay claim to your project while at the same time making it available for future and continued conversation and innovation. So those are some of the really strong reasons to think about publishing your project through ResearchWorks. I'll allow Nick to sort of add to that if he has anything to add, but I think I'll just pass the baton on to him and just give him a moment to talk a little bit more about what ResearchWorks actually is and looks like.
Great, thank you, Annie. So I have to admit, this is a little bit new for CHID because we haven't had the option for CHID students to do this in a formalized way until now. So Annie and I are still actually kind of learning as we're going, and we haven't had direct experience with how this process will go. But consulting with Elliot and a number of our librarian colleagues, we decided that ResearchWorks would be a great platform for CHID students to publish their work. It is, so this is what it looks like. I'm on the library's website, and you can find these links on the CHID website as well. And basically, ResearchWorks is a digital repository and a way of hosting and distributing scholarly work. So kind of one thing just to add a little bit onto what Annie said, it does have, I think, for better and for worse, perhaps, but it does, for better, it has the institutional clout that comes with your work being something that you created and can here publish through the University of Washington. So it has that kind of like scholarly what's the word I'm looking for? Legitimacy, I suppose, but also just in the sense that it is a kind of container in which you can publish your work. So, of course, there are many other places where you might be able to publish your work. The internet is a big place. There are a lot of possibilities, but what kind of makes us distinctive is that it is something that is, it's officially University of Washington, and so if you were to put this on your CV, for example, and a graduate school committee or employer were to look it up, they will see that, oh, this is the University of Washington. Wow, it's amazing that the student already published author, creator, etc. So so that's maybe some of the benefits, is it has that kind of institutional clout of the University of Washington. It also has, in practical terms, we've just determined has the greatest kind of long-term stability. We also learned, our librarian colleagues who think a lot more about what does that really mean to permanently archive something. It's actually a much murkier question than you might imagine. Nothing is necessarily forever, even though, of course, anything that goes on the internet does live for a long time. But this is a very stable place to publish your work. So you get a permanent URL. It always be the same, even if things shift around otherwise. So it has a lot of stability that way. The other things about it, I mean, it is a place that hosts all kinds of different scholarly work. And so you can actually search through this and see, things from all across the university that are housed here. But we also have within ResearchWorks a section for CHID thesis projects. And so this is something like I just typed comparative history of ideas into the search bar, and I found this collection, comparative history of ideas theses. There's not a lot in here so far, and most of it is very out of date, actually. So there's one entry from Sage Brennan from 2018, but otherwise it sort of drops off around 2006. So our hope, as Annie was describing, is that as CHID students start to publish their senior projects here, we'll build out this collection more. And this will be kind of the go-to resource for up-and-coming CHID students to take a look at other work that CHID students have done. So maybe one other thing to mention is it's also a platform that can host a wide range of materials. Any type of digital file can be uploaded, and you can have multiple files as well. So if you have images, things like that, those can it's not just for written papers. The one sort of caveat there is streaming media is not something that can be hosted directly through here. So that's maybe one limitation. Let's see. Yeah, so Elliot is confirming. Elliot may also have some other suggestions if you do have streaming media for alternatives. So I think that's, I will pass it back to Annie now to talk through maybe some possible constraints that are also attached to ResearchWorks.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Nick. So one thing to remember about ResearchWorks is that it is a publication, and like all publications, it is public, not private, and it is open to and searchable by all audiences. So depending on the kind of project that you pursue for your senior project, this might be one consideration at least before you decide to go ahead and publish your project through ResearchWorks. If, for instance, you're not out to your conservative evangelical family in the Midwest and you do a pretty radical queer studies project, maybe that doesn't feel like the safest thing for you at this moment, right? That's just, an example. But you need to sort of be at that point with your intellectual work where you're ready to share it with the world. And the reason for this is that once it's actually published through ResearchWorks, it is not possible to say, just kidding. I don't want it up there. I don't want it available anymore. It's not like a web page that you can sort of like just go to and take something down. And so there's, there are no changes, no retractions. Published scholars often change their minds. So I want you to sort of understand this. It's part and parcel of the work of a working intellectual to to shift in your thinking from something that's out there publicly. And typically what you'll see scholars or intellectuals do is keep publishing and say, I'm, now I've revised my thinking in this, in this article that I published a couple years ago, and here's what I think now. So it's not like it ties you to a certain idea forever, right? But that publication, your project, that moment in time is there forever, forever, or as long as the durability of ResearchWorks lasts. The other constraint to kind of think about is that faculty, since their name is going to be associated with your project as well as your name, will have to sign off on the permissions to publish your project through ResearchWorks. So you want to start a conversation with your faculty advisor early and often, and make sure that they sort of understand the implications as well. So those are the considerations that I can kind of think of. Nick, do you have any other that you would add?
I think that covers it for now. And after Elliot shares a bit about accessibility, we'll come back to kind of the nuts and bolts of how to get faculty approval and actually submit your work. Maybe I would just add, I mean, the part about having your faculty advisors sign off on it, it's not so much about gatekeeping, it's of course there is sort of that element of if we're publishing it as a CHID senior project, then it does have that kind of, again, sort of legitimacy or stamp of approval of being a project that has been supervised by a faculty member. But it is what Annie was saying about having conversations with your advisor. It's also because faculty have more experience with going through exactly what Annie was talking about in terms of how your views might shift, or how you want your published work to represent you. And because they have more experience with this, they might be able to have some guidance for you that's worth considering as you're doing this for probably the first time for most of you. So it's meant, as like encouragement and guidance, not in terms of exclusionary gatekeeping.
I so appreciate that reframing. Thank you, Nick. I think with that, let's pass it over to Elliot to just talk a little bit more about the accessibility of your project. And thank you again, Elliot, for coming today.
Sure, I'll put put something in the chat for the people who are here, but then also I think this is the document that I'm going to be looking at in just a second. This should be something that'll be shared with you. And so I'm going to share my screen here. And with accessibility testing, digital accessibility testing, I think it can be a little overwhelming sometimes. Where do I start? What do I do? But I've tried to break this down more into 7 things to think about as you are bringing something into ResearchWorks. I think for the most part in ResearchWorks, what you'll probably be putting into it is a PDF. And PDFs themselves can have problems with accessibility. But then within your PDF, you might have links to other things, links to things that you've made, or links to things that you're using or that you're in conversation with. And so I think there's a lot of potential for maybe accessibility problems or things that you'll want to test before you bring something into ResearchWorks. And so for these 7 things, I'll just really quickly go through what these things are. But in this document that's going to be shared with you, there's a little bit more instruction and also some links to things. And so one thing that you can always do to test anything digital is the no mouse challenge. It is so simple. It is so elegant. It is so effective. With the no mouse challenge, I put a link to it. You're pretty much just taking something like a document that you've made or a website or an app, and you're seeing if you can navigate it without a mouse. And so using tab to go forward, shift tab to go back, arrows and enter and space bar and escape. If you can navigate most of something with those things, that for one thing, it's an indicator that something is accessible without having to use a mouse, but it also relies underlying accessibility features of just how hierarchically and well organized something is. So the no mouse challenge is a classic of the classics. Another thing is alt text. And so if you're bringing a PDF into ResearchWorks, maybe there's a chance that you're using a bunch of images in your PDF, or maybe within your PDF thesis, maybe you're linking to other things, other websites, other documents. Alt text is where you have an image and you are putting alternative text into that image so that if someone is using a screen reader, maybe a screen reader like JAWS or NVDA or VoiceOver, if they're using a screen reader and if they encounter an image, the alt text will tell the user what is actually in the image. If you don't put in alt text, someone might just be told, this is an image, and they're going to be missing out on a lot of information and context. So alt text is crucial, and whether you're using a Google Doc, a Word doc, a PDF, a Wix site, a Weebly site, a WordPress site, you can usually almost always put alt text into your images. So this is something to do. Link text is another really important thing. So link text, this is when you have text in something, like text in a thesis, text in a website, and within that text, you're going to put a link. You're going to embed a link. So right now in my document here, I have a whole bunch of link text. Where it says no mouse challenge, I have a link embedded in those words, no mouse challenge. And with link text, the general rule is you don't want to use link text that is very vague, like click here or here. That doesn't tell you where you're going. You want link text that indicates where you're going. So no mouse challenge is the link text, and it goes to a no mouse challenge web page. So that's the kind of link text that you want. Color contrast is another big one, especially the color contrast of text. If you have text against a background, you want it to be at an accessible level for people to be able to distinguish it and read it. I put a contrast checker here as some link text. If you know the special code for your text, like every text color has they call it a hex code. And so the code for husky purple is 32006 lowercase e. And if I use the contrast checker and if I put in husky purple against a white background, it's accessible pretty much all the time. It can be thin text, bolded text. Husky purple is excellent because it's very accessible. So color contrast is big. Captions and transcripts. I know a lot of CHID students, sometimes you like to make videos, you like to make podcasts, you like to make recordings, you like to do oral histories. If you're using any of that AV stuff, audio visual stuff, and incorporating it into your thesis, you want to make sure that you provide a caption or a transcript. YouTube can be really great for adding captions to things. If you put a file into YouTube, machine learning will make the captions pretty much immediately. You definitely want to double check those and edit those. I think every time I say the word UW in YouTube, it always changes it to YouTube. So it's like I'm at the YouTube of Washington. It always changes it from UW to YouTube. So make sure to edit your captions. Otter AI is a machine learning thing that can make captions for you, but watch out because they only give 300 minutes a month. So if it's a big oral history project, you might not be able to fully rely on Otter AI to make all your transcripts. Headings is another big one. So if you are using headings in a document or in a website or in an app, if you're using headings to organize information, you want to make sure that you use your headings hierarchically, and you want to make sure that there's only a heading one. And so if you're making a website, if you're making a Google Doc or a Word doc and using headings, there should be only one heading one. You can have as many heading 2s and heading 3s and heading 4s as you want, but you just have to make sure that you use them hierarchical. So a heading 2 should always follow a heading 1, a heading 3 should always follow a heading 2, and so on. Headings are really, really important for people who use assistive technology like screen readers, JAWS, NVDA, VoiceOver. If the headings are well organized, it means that the assistive technology user is going to be able to navigate a site or a document very quickly and very efficiently. If the headings are chaos, then it makes it very difficult for someone who uses assistive technology to make sense of the page with headings. And then another thing that I put here, the last thing, is accessible documents. PDFs are kind of absolutely notorious for having accessibility problems. And so one real quick test to make sure you have an accessible PDF is just, can you highlight the text and copy and paste it? If you are highlighting, if you just can't highlight the text and you can't copy and paste it, then there's a good chance that it's not accessible. Someone who uses a screen reader will not be able to read that text. In fact, they'll probably just be told that the PDF is an image and they'll have no idea what's in the image. Other things is in PDFs, headings can get out of control. Images need alt text. Sometimes tables and graphs don't get picked up. And so these are things to think about when you're making a PDF, is to make sure it's an accessible PDF. So that's really, yeah, really all I have. Try not to worry about 10 million things about accessibility testing, but I think these top 7 things are good ones to think about.
Thank you so much, Elliot, for that. Super helpful. It's something that I'm definitely still learning more about. And I think for most people, this is something where it's not sort of like you can just learn it all at once and implement it perfectly. It takes work and thinking through carefully. I think it's just such an important issue, which I'm so glad is more at the forefront of conversations now, particularly in a place like CHID, right, where we think a lot about the politics of knowledge production and knowledge creation, and that means that we have to think really carefully about how we're going about that process as well, and so that we're making our work as accessible as we can. So thank you so much for that, Elliot. I think I have the last task of talking through a little bit more carefully. How do you actually go about submitting your senior project to ResearchWorks? Usually, in my experience in advising senior projects, they tend to run till the very last minute at the end of the quarter. You're kind of scrambling to put the final touches on things, and so we've created a process where we don't want you to try to immediately submit your work at the same time that you're just like finally finishing, the very last parts of your project. So we have set for now a biannual deadline of there's August 1st and February 1st. And so this would mean, say you finish your project at the end of spring quarter, early June. This would give you still plenty of time to go back to your finished work, make sure that your faculty advisor has had the chance to really review it carefully, not just putting a grade on it, to work on, you'll see on the form here, there's a place for an abstract for your project. You want to put a lot of thought into that. So it's very, useful for people who are looking through projects later. That's its own kind of skill, I think, how to describe your project very succinctly. And then also the accessibility concerns, right? So, if you're just finishing your work, one thing Elliot didn't say, but I've heard him say before, is that if you are attentive to these issues as you're working on your project, you're going to make your life a lot easier later. If you are, thinking about link text and things like that, it's much easier to kind of do it as well as possible as you're making it, rather than going back later and trying to fix these. But probably that's going to be necessary in a lot of cases to go back carefully and make sure that your project is as accessible as possible. So we have this expectation that you'll take a little bit more time to go through this process of preparing your work for final publication. I mean, obviously you want to check it again for typos and things like that, because again, as Annie said, you can't just make corrections. It's not like a website. So that's sort of the larger process. And this is a form that you can find on the CHID website. It's linked in the section about senior project archiving, and it has some basic information here. We want to collect not just your UW email address, but also a personal email address, so that after you graduate, you will lose your access to UW email. We want to be able to stay in contact later. So that information gets collected here. And then here is the place where you will sign off on various considerations, making clear that you understand that you can't rescind publication, that it is public. The second one explains the copyright that you will retain, but that UW Libraries is a non-exclusive license to help share your work. And then the last one has to do with institutional review board considerations. This does not usually come up with CHID projects, but sometimes it does. And so we want to make sure that you have fulfilled those expectations if that does apply. Again, this is something that your faculty advisor can help with. I just want to make sure that everything is good to go. And then on the second page, there's a section for your advisor to sign off. And so this will also explain to them, because CHID faculty are not going to be so used to this yet, I don't think, that their names will be on this and that this will be public. And so this also kind of outlines their responsibilities to you to make sure that they've provided the faculty guidance that you should have as an undergraduate publishing your senior project. So then we have spaces to sign off on that. We'll retain this document permanently so that we have a record of it. And then from there, Annie and I can help you connect with the libraries and upload your project for publication. So I think that's about it. I don't know if Annie or Elliot, if you have anything to add to that. Or Al, if you have any questions in the chat.
Maybe just the abstract bit. I personally find sometimes I use ResearchWorks to, I have used it in the past to look for, like there are a lot of amazing undergraduate student research papers in ResearchWorks. So sometimes when I've met with undergraduate students and they're wondering like, what does good work look like? Like I really rely on ResearchWorks. And if the abstract is there, it makes search, it's so great to be able to see the abstract without having to look at the whole paper. I often use ResearchWorks a ton for finding dissertations. So when undergraduates sometimes ask me, what is it like to write a dissertation? All of our amazing UW dissertations are in ResearchWorks. Or if I'm ever wondering like, what is the cutting edge research about something in a certain field? Sometimes I look at like UW graduate student dissertations about things like whatever the topic is, like, artificial intelligence right now. Like I might want to see what are some dissertations being written about that. So I think the abstract can go a long way in making something, in making this useful for future people, like as they're going through ResearchWorks.
That's an excellent point. I mean, it's a place where you will probably include, keywords that come up in your project. And so when somebody else is searching for those things, then that's amazing. Then your work becomes part of the research that they can cite and contributes to the larger learning community of UW. So
because I think the metadata, I think it really focuses on author name, title of the work, and the abstract. I don't think like the actual thesis itself won't be involved with the search.
That's excellent clarification. Always ask a librarian if you want to know how stuff actually works. Great. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions in the chat. So I don't know. Annie and Elliot, if we have nothing else, we could probably wrap it up here. We look forward to hearing from you and working with you and building out our archive of CHID senior projects and ResearchWorks.
Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.